I'm Grace Macarone, Executive Editor at Holiday House.
I'm Jane Yolen, and I'm one of the authors. This is actually, I think, my 391st book.
Yay!
Wow.
Yes, hooray. I'm David Harrison, and this is not my 396th book, but it is my 98th book. So I'm a distant second to Jane, but I'm working at it.
Good.
I'm Anjan Sarkar. I'm the illustrator, British illustrator. I think this is maybe book about 20, so I'm way behind.
So you have years to go.
David and I are working as fast as we can to make a legacy before we go, and you've got plenty of time.
Okay, so we have this wonderful book to talk about, Rum Pum Pum, and of course, one of the most interesting things about this book is that it has two authors. So, David or Jane, would you like to talk about how that came about?
David, why don't you start, since it actually started with you?
All right. I started blogging in 2009. And after 11 years, my wife still asks me from time to time, why do you do this? I usually have a hard time explaining that because I'm not sure either. But once in a while, something glorious happens through the blog. And here is a great case. One day, said the storyteller, January 28th, 2015, Sandy Asher and I were preparing for the last essay about a subject that we do for a segment we call Writers at Work. And it had to do with preparing to write, getting ready, doing your research. How do you find your ideas and make sure that you're comfortable with them and know what you're talking about so that you can talk about them? Well, Jane very helpfully came forward with some information about how she does it. And for some reason, that triggered a thought in my son's mind, Jeff, who has been asking for a tiger story since he was 6 years old. And all these years, I put the poor man off, not on purpose, it just didn't happen. And so Jeff piped up with, here's one. How about once upon a time, there was a tiger. He's just ribbing the old man. Jane came back quickly, as Jane can. And here's what Jane said. Rum pum pum went the drum. Roar went the tiger. And they went along and went along and went along the road, and soon they met. And she passed it over to me. Now, in those 4 lines, Jane brilliantly established the format for what became Rum Pum Pum. She named it. She had the drum talking. She had the tiger talking. She had this wonderful read aloud went along and went along and went along the road. And then she handed it over to me for the next segment. That's brilliant. It's why she has 396 books to my miserable 98. Oh, what happened?
It was such fun because I'm a fast writer, and David is too. And so in the front of all the people who were watching his blog, he came up with probably, what was the next one?
The next one was from me, and it came 15 minutes later. And it says, a monkey, in answer to, and soon they met, a monkey singing in a tree. It's a mighty fine day, sang the monkey. I'll come too. Rum pum pum with the drum. Roar with the tiger. "It's a mighty fine day," sang the monkey. And they went along and went along and went along the road, and soon they met. And I handed it back to Jane. So the final version of our book has been edited, has been polished. It's not exactly this, but it was so close. I mean, from the very beginning. And before you know it, Jane is emailing me and saying, "I think we should go offline. We seem to be writing a picture book." And so I submit this, and Jane can do whatever she wants to say now, but this is a classic example of two old people having a good time. We've been there.
Thanks.
We've been there and we've done that, and we like each other and we trust one another. And this just happened, and it happened because of this blog opportunity that presented itself, and away we went. Back to you, Jane.
Well, to me, it's part of what I do when I teach students is to say, you just have to be aware all the time, pay attention all the time, because ideas are everywhere. And this was probably the best show of how he had actually called it the Lonely Tiger, I think, for years. And didn't know what to do with it. And so the piece was originally titled The Lonely Tiger, but Grace really, the editor, really thought of just calling it Rum Pum Pum, and she was absolutely right. But the Lonely Tiger thought the drum was a friend. And then he thought each of the next creatures, who he might have otherwise eaten, of course, thought that they became friends, so that it was a cumulative story, which is very popular, a kind of story for very young children and very folkloric. And it just settled itself into the rhythms on its own, but it had to start with the idea. And the idea was handed to me by David Harrison on his blog. Now, there were many people on that blog, many people who were reading it. Any one of them could come up with that idea, and none of them did, except for David and me.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that, Grace?
I love it. I'm glad you brought up the rhythms, Jane, because I thought it was really interesting that you were able to get into each other's rhythm to make one cohesive story. And you're both poets. And can you talk about that a little bit?
David, take it away.
Okay. I think Jane may or may not agree, but I assume she probably will, that poetry informs my other writing. It informs my prose writing. And in a number of my prose books, critics, reviewers have made the suggestion that it might be free verse, or that the writing is elegant in that it resembles poetry, if not poetry. So I think those of us who focus on poetry quite often are just equally careful when choosing our words and the rhythm of our words when we're writing anything else. So yes, this isn't exactly poetry, but it has elements, I think, of poetry in it. And again, it just comes naturally when you have done enough books, enough writing, put in enough years. In my case, over 50 years. Jane is much younger, so I'm sure she's probably 10 or 15 years or so. and so that's why I think we not only have known each other and worked together and spoken at conferences and so on, we have a sort of intuitive feeling about where the other one's going to go next. And by going back and forth from verse to verse, page to page, it became surprisingly easy to just keep it moving. And before we knew it, we wrote this thing so fast I couldn't believe it. But of course, writing that first draft is very often done quickly. It's what comes after that slows you down a little bit.
Polish, 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 revise, 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 send it to the editor, revise, revise, revise. I think that books are made in their revision stage, not in their initial stage. The initial stage is this sort of fast mass pouring of stuff onto the page, and then you have to shape it. It's like shaping a pot on a wheel. You put the clay down there, you've got the clay. You move it around a bit on the wheel, and slowly the thing occurs between your hands. And I think that writing is very much like that, especially writing poetry is very much like that. You start with a word, or you start with a line, or you start with a stanza, and then you look at it and say, this is something, I don't know what it is yet. And then it becomes that poem. I think the relationship between picture books and poetry, whether they are in poetry or not, whether they rhyme or not, whether they are metered or not, the relationship between picture books and poetry is very strong, and probably goes back to the time when I think they were either folk tales or they were nursery rhymes. Mm-hmm. So when we write a picture book now, we write it with, especially people like David and I do it, I think, instinctively. We have that lyrical line in head. And because we're both poets, we can finish each other's lines.
Mm-hmm. Yes, good point. Excellent point.
Did you just have any disagreements? How did you work out any kind of conflict or disagreement?
We're both such old hands at this. I mean, my first book came out in 1963. I don't know when David's came out, probably in aught.
a little before that, Jane, if it's any of your business.
So that neither one of us took the other's reconstructions or suggestions or editorial stuff. We didn't take it personally. Oh, no. We thought about it. We said, does this work for the book? Does it not work for the book? It wasn't, he's tearing me apart. It's, we are working on that book together, so that if somebody suggests something, you can say yes, you can say no, you can say maybe, you can say show me. Mm-hmm. All of those things are possible. I now am working with my fiance on books, and we very quickly fell into that because he has several books out himself, and understands that it, just because somebody says something critical doesn't mean that they hate you. They still love you.
Yeah, well, if there's not much that I can add to that, because I agree 100%. I do believe that not all partnerships work equally well, and not all partnerships work on the same level, or because everyone is different and works differently. So that if I'm working with someone else, our relationship during the course of writing may be somewhat different. Yet, in the end, we all want one thing, and that is to create a good story, a good book. So you have to learn how to talk to your partner. And in this case, as Jane says, we just say what we think, and we're focusing on the work, not on one another. We're just trying to get the work done.
Well, I know David's books. I know how beautiful they are and how well written they are. I trust him that if we're working on a book together, we're going to be together on the ideas, the lines. We want the best for the book, just as the editor wants the best for the book. I may disagree with Grace, for example, but I wouldn't disagree with the idea that she had a problem with something. And sometimes I will take exactly what she says, and other times I'll take exactly what she says and do it my way.
There you go.
And I think that Grace as an editor is that kind of an editor who will say, yeah, that's not exactly what I suggested, but it's better. Mm-hmm. Or it didn't work, let's try something else. each of those things is something that can happen.
I found you both very easy to work with, and which is wonderful because I didn't know what it would be like to work with two authors. I had actually never done that before, and you were both great and so easy and so professional. And you, as you said, you listened, and you came back with something even better, and that's always wonderful.
Then we should do another one.
Yes.
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 Jane, we need to cut this short. We have a book to write.
Right.
Anjan, what did you think of the manuscript when you saw it?
It was kind of unusual the way that this book happened for me, because it was because you gave me the text just as a piece of writing, as a poem, rather than laid out in sort of galley form or with any layouts or any sort of sizes. You just gave it to me and let me kind of look at it. So I kind of looked at it as a poem and as a sort of flowing piece of writing. So yeah, I thought, oh, it looks like a poem or a song to me. And there was definitely something kind of, because it sort of repeats itself in places. It felt like a song almost. So yeah, that's how I sort of looked at it.
Were there any particular challenges that you saw with the manuscript, or?
I think when I got it, I was kind of thinking, oh, how am I going to lay it out? How am I going to divide it up into pages? And I sort of eventually came to the conclusion that it had to be sort of mostly double pages, because it was the gang kind of walking together, and I wanted to just show the kind of accumulation of characters and parts of the story sort of coming together in each section. So yeah, I sort of felt like when I came to that conclusion that it had to be double pages, I questioned it, whether is that right? Is that something that, should it be like that? But then I just thought it's got to be like that, because that's what feels right to me. So yeah, that was interesting.
John, may I interject something?
Yeah.
What struck me when I first saw your work was that you had ingested, swallowed, brought inside yourself our work from first to last. You owned it now, it was yours. Mm-hmm. And you made that continuity so smooth, and it brought to life what Jane and I were seeing in our imagination and in our mental images that we run through like a movie itself. And there you were, bringing all these characters together and making it a cohesive story. And I was extremely impressed with the way you handled that. So thank you.
That's great.
I want to agree. We just both sort of chuckled and grinned when we saw the stuff that was coming out. But I also wanted to add something. You talked about the musicality. I actually write songs. I've been in a band. My band just broke up, but I was in a band at 81. My grandson said, "Nana's in a band? What does she play?" And my son, who is his father, is a professional musician, said, "The audience."
Well, if we're going to talk about our bands, I too am in a band, and we call it Byron Bigger's Band, and it's to take off on one of my poems. And there are three of us, and we occasionally play the audience too, Jane, although I've heard a CD from you, and I was quite impressed. And our band had CDs made one time, three of them, one for each of us, and all three of us, we all lost the CDs. We can't find one among us. So anyway, back to you, John.
That's funny, because actually I'm a drummer, so I'm not in the band at the moment, but I have been a drummer. And the sort of interesting thing about the book was when I got it, I sort of realized that it was like Indian drums, and I actually owned a set of tabla, which I
Did you?
had
Oh,
out. So I used them as like a reference. So
I think we need to have a band called Rum Pum Pum that
yeah, do it.
just for your sakes, I will keep my trombone in the closet. I won't try to play that one.
Well, I have no voice left, so that's problematic. But we could certainly write the songs for other people.
Yes, we can do that. Yeah.
Is there anything else anybody would like to add to the conversation?
What I love was being able to, at the end, talk about tigers and how tigers are now one of those species that are endangered. And maybe if this book can do anything, it can alert children who will be able to put in their 2, 3, 5, 10 cents and say, let's try to save the tigers.
I was going to say the same thing, Jane, as well as throughout the book, when we mention a tree or plant or the drum, these are in fact real. And something that not everyone may be aware of, that even in fiction, it all starts with nonfiction. It starts with facts. And here's another case in point, that the people who write these books, in this case, the two of us, go to some effort to make sure that when we name something, we're giving that child, that young reader, some real information to go with the fun of reading. Well, that was a crowd stopper.
Well, thank you, everyone. This was really great. And thank you for such a beautiful book. I wish that we could all celebrate over lunch together, and maybe someday we can.
We will.
We can do elbow things.
I actually had the opportunity to meet Anjan in Bologna, and that was really great. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, it was a great meeting. I really enjoyed it, meeting everyone from Holiday House. It was fantastic.
That was great. And
thank you, Grace. Thank you for bringing it all together.
Absolutely.
And you were the one who found Anjan and made the magic.
Thank you for finding me.
And now we know where you are.
Yeah.
Grace, you're a wonderful editor, and it's so fun to work with, and thank you for all your work, as well as the whole team at Holiday House. We're very much appreciative of each person and what they do to help create the book and now to promote it. So let's go promote.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Our publicity and marketing people have entered a whole new world, and they've really embraced it. So that's wonderful.
Right.
Nice to see you all. Nice to talk to you all.
See you.
And now off to the real world.
Okay.